Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the articles relevant for the prelims as well as the mains examination, take a look at the answer writing with the help of a practice answer as well. And along with that, we will continue our initiative to focus on the PIB as well. So, in various different articles, we have inculcated the inputs from the PIB as well as taken a couple of separate articles and updates from the PIB so that you are well prepared for the mains exam for the prelims and the mains examination as well. Now, having said that, today we are going to have a discussion of around 8 different topics. Now, some of them in greater detail. So, basically, the one which has appeared in the editorial section, that is after Maoism, you have the next battle is for Adivasi trust. Now, this has appeared in the editorial page of the newspaper, and that is what we are going to consider in greater detail, the static portion associated with that as well. Base and framework. This is regarding the changes which have been brought into place associated with the change in IIP numbers, the index. And there we will take a look at it. Here we will make use of the PIB data as well. So this is relevant for your GS paper 2 and GS paper 3 rather, both of them. Okay. Now base and framework is relevant for your GS paper 3. Then after that, is climate research being held back by the local instrumentation? Now, this is a follow-up article associated with the Mega Science Vision Document 2035, which has been released, and that is associated with the aspect of climate change. So, we will take the opportunity of discussing the key outcomes of the policy document. What are the key outcomes? And what is relevant for your examination in detail, so that this PDF is sufficient for your entire revision as well. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. PDF you can download from the Telegram group eventually. Now, US moots 12.5% tariff on India for failure to enforce forced labor regulations. This has appeared in the first page, the page 1 of the newspaper. Now, this is a new way of US introducing a set of tariffs. Now, this is where we are going to have some discussion about the article, but we are also going to discuss some of the international regulations associated with forced labor. Okay, so this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 2, as well as some portions of GS paper 1. Now, then, Union Cabinet approves rupees 9,500 crore scheme to cut pollution in Delhi NCR by incentivizing the buying of BS6 and electric vehicles. So this becomes relevant for your prelims, the stages or the steps taken by the government to incentivize the commercial vehicle operators. S-400 defense system, the 4th squadron of S-400 system has arrived in India and it will be deployed after the success of Operation Sindoor. Now, this becomes very important for us. So what are some of the key capabilities of S-400 system is what we will take a look into. Now, the government has provided 10,000 crore worth of price stabilization associated with the aviation turbine fuel. Now, that has made the flight transportation costly, and the rise in the ATF prices have basically hit the airlines and the passengers alike. So what is this scheme of price stabilization fund? We'll take a look into that, and some discussion about E85 fuel along with the discussion associated with the PIB article. So that is what we are going to have a discussion for today. Now, before we start the discussion for the day, announcement for all of you. Now, many of the times as candidates, we are not very well aware about how to write an essay, what to write in an essay, right? So when we think about preparation of civil services, we are oftentimes so burdened only by the GS papers so as to write the exams that essay takes a backseat. Having said that, essay paper is one of the most scoring papers and is a difference creator. Now, UPSC, when it is asking philosophical essays, many students see it as a problem, but that is where I say that it is an opportunity for you. So, tomorrow on YouTube at 7 p.m. on the same channel, you can attend the essay masterclass live session. You can understand how to think about an essay, how to write an essay. We will be discussing with the help of the PYQs so that you get an idea about what essay could have been written, how to broaden your perspective when it comes to essay writing. So join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. live. Okay? Now, for everyone preparing for the mains examination, and even if we are not getting through the prelims this time, but still preparation of mains is very important. You have only around 80 days between prelims to mains. So now is the time to work for the mains examination, even if you are appearing this year or even if you are appearing next year. So that is where we have the Conquer Mains program for UPSC mains, and that is at 9,999. So you will have live lectures for mains with special focus on answer writing, live answer writing sessions. Some of the mains handouts will be given, and answer evaluation will be done by the educators in the classes itself. Evaluation overall will be ensured in 48 hours. You also get the mains booklet, the study material based on the PYQs, a concise revision module for mains, that is the MRTS. Along with that, you will have live answer writing sessions for the toppers as well, so that you understand what they would have done correctly and what should be the approach that should be followed. Now, we start with the first article of the day, and that is After Maoism, the next battle is for Adivasi trust. Now, this is an article relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as for your GS paper 3. Now, Naxalism is a problem from which India has, or with which India has been plagued with for decades now. Countless number of lives have been lost in the battle against left-wing extremism and Naxalism. The infamous Red Corridor would be referred to as those areas which are impacted by Naxalism. And that at one point of time would stretch from the region of West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, all the way till Kerala. Red Corridor was really expansive. And we also had Dr. Manmohan Singh, who referred to this as one of the biggest security challenges that India faced, greater than even the threat from Pakistan. So that was the scale of the problem. Now, with the help of the security measures that the government has taken, the government has gained a tactical victory against Naxalism on the battlefield. The Red Corridor districts have almost been eliminated. But here, the article argues that the battle is only half won. While you have basically eliminated the armed cadre, that is, the people wielding guns, but at the same time, you have a set of problems associated with the developmental requirement of the Adivasis. After all, when we talk about these left wing extremist elements, for them, the Adivasis would always be an easy recruit. Why? Because of multiple reasons, we will discuss about them. But having said that, if we want to basically uproot the entire issue of insurgency in that area, we have to ensure that timely development also tends to happen, and we also have to ensure the enforcement and implementation of PESA Act and so on. So what are those? Let us discuss very quickly. So first of all, if you take a look at the left-wing extremism. Now, in 2013, we had around 182 Naxal-affected districts across the country. And then in basically March 30, 2026, we only have them restricted to two. That is Bijapur and Sukma in Chhattisgarh. In rest all the areas, the Naxals, at least the extremist elements, have been eliminated completely. So that is where, when we talk about the case of Naxalism, we have to understand that the problem is much more deep-rooted. So here, the entire cadre of left-wing extremists. They had a lot of recruits which were there for decades altogether, based upon certain aspects. So the recruitment or the recruits were basically based on, first is ideology. Now, what is this ideology factor? Ideology factor is that there was a larger clarion call that you have the landowners, the larger landed magnates, the zamindars. They are basically oppressing the individuals under the garb of forced labor, under the garb of lesser income, and so on. For example, in the region of Gadchiroli, now you had the case of the BD workers. Now, the BD workers, the Adivasis in the forested area, now they would collect tendu leaves throughout the day. Now, eventually, they would collect all the tendu leaves, large amount of tendu leaves in the basket, and they would carry them. But do you know how they would be paid for their daily labor? Those tendu leaves would be woven into a string, and that string would be wrapped around the head. So, one wrapping would amount to around 5 paise. So, like that, imagine if you have collected the tendu leaves throughout the day, you would end up earning somewhere around 20 to 30 rupees per day. This was the kind of huge amount of exploitation of this labor force which was done. Along with that, you also had a case of lack of development. The government machinery was absolutely absent, okay, from the region. In terms of when we talk about, let's suppose, mobile communication, the presence of hospitals, the presence of schools, the presence of basic civic amenities, they were absent. So, in the case where the government machinery is absent, it is always easy for some other force to take over and carry out the brainwashing exercise and carry out the intense amount of radicalization as well. So that is also one of the ways in which they could always have a greater amount of recruit force. Other than that, you also had the case of exploitation by the machinery, exploitation by the state. Now, what do we mean by exploitation by the state? So here, for example, when we talk about the case of the Gram Sabhas, now Gram Sabhas have been empowered to be the decision makers, particularly in these fifth schedule areas, so that there can be a say of the local people, the villagers, in terms of the minor forest produce, in terms of the mineral resources which are present there, so that they have their say and control over what is referred to as the Jal, Jungle and the Jameen. Now, that is the water, the forest, and the land. They wanted, and they have always wanted a control over that. Now, the government oftentimes, for example, the Chhattisgarh government, as is cited in the article in 2022, it tried to circumvent the requirement of a consent by the Gram Sabha by removing the term consent and replacing it with consult. So in that case, in many of the regions, for example, it has been the case in Jharkhand, in Odisha, in Chhattisgarh, in Telangana, in Maharashtra as well, that mineral areas, mineral-rich areas have been diverted away and the tribal lands have been usurped by the state or has been taken by the state forcibly, and that leads to a lot of resentment. And that resentment is an ideal fodder ground for, let's suppose, someone wanting to pick up arms against the state. Now, this is the case of exploitation by the state. Then you also have the case of poverty, extreme and unabated form of poverty. For example, in Odisha, you had the very famous, the Kalahandi, Koraput and the Bolangir corridor, the KBK corridor, where you have all the various different types of deprivations, the social deprivations, the poor social health indicators, all of them were present. Malnutrition was very prominent. Now, in these conditions, if somebody comes to you and tells you that I will give you a greater amount of money, you just follow the ideology, obviously, you will follow that. So that is where Naxalism had its breeding ground. Now, over the past couple of decades, the government has been systematically working to remove these problems. It started, first of all, with paving the way for developmental projects in these backward areas, laying of roads, installment of the mobile towers, setting up of the schools, hospitals, etc. Now that faced certain amount of problems. Then it was merged with the security initiatives where each of the various different states, for example, Andhra Pradesh, had a very specialized unit, the Greyhounds. Now they had specialized training in jungle warfare. Intelligence gathering was improved. And like that, you had the individual commando groups by the state police, which was formed. Greater state to state interaction and coordination was ensured. And that is where they were dealt with a kind of a death blow. After that, you also have the initiatives such as the aspirational districts program. Now, under the aspirational districts program, those particular districts, and most of them lying in the red corridor, which fell behind in the developmental parameters in the first 7 decades of our independence. Now, those districts are laid particular attention and emphasis to. There is a greater amount of investment, funding, which is done for the availability of funds in these particular states. So, thereby, there have been multiple concerted efforts and multifaceted efforts in all different areas in order to help move or remove the scourge of Naxalism. So we have succeeded in removing the Naxal impacted districts quite substantially. But the article argues that the work is only half done. Now, the Home Minister, while addressing the press conference, he said that the end date for removing or eradicating the scourge of Naxalism was 31st of March 2026. That while that has been achieved, but the process is not complete. And he set a goal for 2031 for mainstreaming of the Adivasi community, for development and welfareism of the Adivasi community as well. So that is what we will focus upon. Now, here, one particular act which comes into great prominence and great discussion has been asked in the examination multiple times as well, is the case of the PESA. That is the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, which is there, right? Now, while it is not mentioned in detail in this article, but you should be aware about the PESA Act, right? So, Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Area Act 1996, what it does, it is basically a kind of a self-governance, right? So, by the 73rd and the 74th Amendment to the Constitution, when we established the decentralized model of governance in the state, in the district level, in the rural areas with the Panchayati Raj institutions, the setting up of the ward committees, etc. That is where the PESA Act basically allows the implementation of it in the rural sector, in the rural areas, particularly in the fifth schedule areas. Fifth schedule areas where you have a substantial amount of tribal population. Those are your fifth schedule areas. Okay. So what does it do? Empowers the Gram Sabhas with statutory authority to govern themselves. So it is like a tribal self-rule in fifth schedule areas. Which are those fifth schedule areas, by the way? So these are present in 10 states. Okay. 10 states of the country: Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan. These are the states in which are included in the fifth schedule. Now here, basically, now which are the states or the regions in sixth schedule? Let me know in the comment section below. So here, in these areas, the villagers through the Gram Sabhas will have a control in their local resources and local natural resources, preserve their cultural identity, their traditions, overriding the standard Panchayati Raj institutions and the standard bureaucratic framework. Now, some of the key features of the PESA Act, which is important for you, is Gram Sabha supremacy. Okay. Each village must have a Gram Sabha, which would include the village members, competent to safeguard traditions, cultural identity, community resources, and customary dispute resolution. So when we talk about the Gram Sabha supremacy, Here, any decision in that rural area associated with the diversion of the forest or associated with the extraction of the minerals or any economic activity that cannot be done without the consent of the Gram Sabha. The consent of Gram Sabha is acutely important. This is what the Chhattisgarh government tried to basically circumvent, because consent, unless and until people won't agree, any project won't move forward, right? And you need, in any particular area, let's suppose you are setting up a large power plant. Now you need the land, which will include maybe 10 gram sabhas, 20 gram sabhas. You need the consent of all of them. Many of the time, the state machinery experiences some difficulty. That is where the Chhattisgarh government in 2022 tried to replace this consent with consult. So that is what we have to understand, that these kind of measures by the state governments, that weakens the trust that the population has in the government machinery. So we have to refrain from that. We have to basically agree with the consent. Now, control over natural resources. Now, Gram Sabhas are vested with rights to manage and control the minor forest produce, minor water bodies, and minor minerals within their village limits. They are the prime controller. Consent-based development, prior approval and consultation of the Gram Sabha is legally mandatory before undertaking any development projects or acquiring the transferred tribal land in that area. Protection of social and economic rights, right? Customary law and practices, the local customs, etc. So the Gram Sabha is the main power which will take care of all of these and is the main aggregator for all of these. Now, that is where the problem lied. Now, what is the way forward? If we want to understand the removal of insurgency in any particular region of the globe, take a macro view here, guys. Removal of Naxalism or eradication of Naxalism is not just eliminating the extremist elements on the ground. Naxalism is a problem because it is, or it can persist for a longer period of time because it is ideologically driven. And you have to understand that. Ideology can lay low for a long period of time and can spark again. So if we want to remove the scourge of insurgency for forever, we have to ensure that the root causes which have allowed for that insurgency and that ideology to develop, those root causes are addressed. If those root causes are not addressed, insurgency continues. We have the example of still active insurgent groups, particularly in the region around Nagaland and Manipur. You still have some of the active insurgent groups. And with the Manipur conflict on the boil, you observe that many of the earlier dormant insurgent groups, they again started finding a voice, they again started getting some following, and many people were urged to pick up arms. Naxalism, the battle against Naxalism, is not won just by eliminating the extremists. So what should be done? Implementation of PESA to the fullest of the requirement. The letter of the law has to be followed. And this is where, in case there is a violation, the government of the day has to take a stance, and a tough stance for that matter, in order to ensure that people's right, they gain supremacy over the economic rights. So here, PESA has to follow a principle of people's first. Right? Principle of people first. That has to be ensured. Okay. Now, people have to be kept at the center stage. Issues related to Jal, Jungle, and Jameen, that is, water, forest, and the land. So the ownership rights in this particular case are very important. And that is where subversion of the land for other economic activities have always led to a detrimental impact in the overall psyche and the rights of the population. So that is where the land rights of tribals, Adivasis, That has to be kept in mind. Then you have the trust building process. So this trust building process is a long time game. Now this will happen when you have the presence of healthcare, healthcare, education, so that the socio-economic parameters are taken care of, right? Rations, availability of the government scheme through the government schemes, that has to be provided, right? Then you need to have cooperative policing, because many of the times this also would happen, that the police would be so very harsh, unduly harsh on the population, on the people in that region, that people would feel victimized. And on the side of the police forces, they always had the suspicion that the villagers are basically leaking out information to the Naxals, and that is leading to the loss of lives. So that is where the villagers or the Adivasis, they would be oppressed by the Naxals and not helped by the police as well. So that is where cooperative policing, where again you have to look at people as assets rather than with suspicion, that has to come into place. And then after that, you need to have the security apparatus. When we talk about security apparatus, state to state coordination, then the training of police forces in jungle warfare, so that in these regions of, for example, the Abu Jamar forest, right, that is where you have some of the last strongholds of the Naxals. Now in those areas, they are not allowed to respawn. Okay, so that is where we have to ensure that the jungle warfare schools, which we have developed across the country, you have the the Greyhound commando groups, the Cobra commandos in certain cases. So all of them are trained substantially to ensure that this problem doesn't arise. So you need to have a multi-pronged approach in this. Also, economic needs, so the aspirational district program, important for you to name the government schemes. Aspirational district program. Yes, the PESA Act is of 1996. Correct. That is the PESA Act, 1996. Okay. Now, let us take a look at the practice question, 10 marks. How do we write the answer for this? Pause the video and think about it. So, elimination of LWE, left-wing extremist insurgency, is not a dated target, but is a process. So how do you write the answer? If possible here, get the scope to draw the rough map of the country as well. So how do you introduce this answer? What is the introduction that you write? So in the intro, you will write about that the problem of left-wing extremism, because that is the key word of the question. So that has to be addressed. So LWE insurgency is a greater internal security, or is a massive internal security challenge that the country has been facing for more than 5 to 6 decades. At its peak, it did cover multiple states of the country, starting from West Bengal all the way till Kerala. That formed the so-called famous Red Corridor. So you have to talk about LWE insurgency. Okay, you have to talk about Red Corridor. Both of them you have to talk about. Then eventually in the body portion, you start mentioning about that it has got different paradigms. This insurgency has got a security threat that has to be dealt with. Okay, the security threat, and that can be the people, the extremist elements, right? So the arms and the ammunitions that people have picked up. So for that, you need specialized commando force, which has been put into place, due to which the security forces have managed to reduce the problem of Naxalism only to 2 districts right now, and that too is in the process of elimination. Then, developmental requirements, developmental requirements. That is also something you have to mention. Then all the factors that we had mentioned in this portion, ideology, that is lack of development, exploitation by the state, poverty, these are the factors that you can mention here. Okay. Now, after that, in the conclusion, so you mention about those initiatives, the implementation of the PESA Act, etc., in greater detail. In conclusion, you have to mention again with an anthropogenic view and a positive aspect. A positive outlook in the conclusion is required, suggested. So, how do you conclude? In conclusion, you can say that the key or the cornerstone of the entire issue has to be the people. Now, unless and until we solve the problem of the population, unless and until we help them achieve the sustainable development goal of zero poverty, zero hunger, no malnourishment, and so on, till then, our job is half done. In order to achieve that goal of Viksit Bharat, we have to ensure that the tribal community is a key component of that growth rather than being sidelined in the process. That is where a multi-pronged approach of development, inclusion, rights, respecting the cultural values is required to ensure that this insurgency is over once and for all. So here you are providing a kind of a way forward also, a kind of an optimistic outlook and linking it with the Viksit Bharat program. So that is how you have to dovetail your answer. Okay. Now, then coming on to the second article, that is base and framework. This is relevant for GS paper 3. Now, when we talk about there have been multiple series of changes which have been done in the economic parameters, index of industrial production, WPI, all the various different parameters have experienced a change. Now, when we talk about the IIP, that is where you had the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, that releases index of industrial production. This portion becomes relevant for your prelims. Okay. Now, this index of industrial production has got its base year revised. Along with that, it has also had a change in the weightage given to various sectors. That also becomes important for your exam. So here, what I have done is I have directly picked up the sources from the PIB so that this is a one-stop area, or the video itself and the PDF itself, where you are able to simultaneously cover the newspaper article also and the PIB also. Having said that, now in the month of April, the growth was, industrial output growth was 4.9% year on year. But this growth of 4.9% year on year was not equally distributed. The good news in this particular portion was the increase in the capex, right? Capital goods. Capital goods expanded at 16% year on year. Now, capital goods is basically where you end up creating long-term assets. And it also, when you have a growth in the manufacturing of the capital goods, that also tells that your overall manufacturing process is gaining maturity. You are manufacturing and you are adding higher amount of value to the products as well. So that always is an indicator of a maturing economy. So that is good. But when it comes to the consumer durables and consumer non-durables, that is where the growth is stymied. And that indicates the impact that the Iran war and the rising fuel prices are having on the overall economic setup. Right? So here, first things relevant for your basic prelims. So what is the new changes that have been there? What are the new changes in the IIP? The numbers which have been changed. First of all, base year has been revised from 2011-12 to 22-23. Now, expanded the scope and coverage by including gas supply, water supply, sewage, and waste management activities. After all, we talk about waste to energy generation, managing of urban waste, and that is a problem that the entire country is facing. Be it Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, Kolkata, every city of our country is being burdened by waste. We talk about that waste, but that had never been included in the case of the production parameter. So that is what has been done. Greater granularity has been provided for providing separate indices for electricity generation. Earlier, electricity generation was considered to be one index. Now, within that electricity generation, generation from renewables has been provided a separate one. Similarly, for example, earlier, mining and quarrying, that was considered as one item. Now, that has been expanded to three now. Right? You have the metallic minerals, rare earth elements, all of them differently, so that you can actually monitor and measure that year on year, month on month, whether your increase in critical minerals, rare earth mineral production has happened, or only you have been relying upon the increase in coal and so on. So that is where you basically have an increased granularity that will allow for better tracking. Fuel minerals, metallic minerals, and non-metallic minerals. So item basket has been revamped to cover 463 item groups overall. Additions: cards with magnetic stripes, CCTV camera, articles of non-woven textile, parts of aircraft and spacecraft. These were not included in IIP earlier. These have been included. So here, multi-statement based MCQs can be expected in the prelims, that which of them have been added, aircraft parts and spacecraft parts and so on. Okay. Stents, vaccine, other than the veterinary vaccine, all of them have been the additions. There have been deletions as well. What are the deletions? Fluorescent tubes and CFLs, tubes for bicycle, tricycle, or rickshaw tires, tubes for light motor vehicle tires, printing machinery, sewing machineries, they have actually been deleted. So that is the case of the change in the IAP. The weightage of each sector has also changed. By how much? Again, relevant for your examination. So earlier, when the base year was 2011, 2012, you would find that mining and quarrying had a weightage of 14.3%. That has been reduced to 11%. Why? Primary sector activities over a period of time as the economy transitions. Understand this. For 2 minutes, just listen to this carefully. When an economy is in a very nascent stage or in a very primitive state, majority of the output in the economy is generated by fishing, agriculture, mining, quarrying. That is the primary sector activity. As the economy develops, manufacturing starts to take the center stage, right? The steel plants, the locomotive plants, the shipbuilding, the automotive plants, etc. So, when the economy grows, ideally, there should be a transition from primary to secondary. Eventually, for those people working in the industries, they require banking services, they require restaurant services, they require airline services. So the development of the manufacturing would lead to the development of the services sector. That is how an economy generally transitions from the primary sector to the secondary, eventually to the tertiary and the quaternary and quinary areas. That is basically based upon the maturing of the economic activities. Now, earlier we had a greater emphasis on the primary activity, that is mining and quarrying. That has been reduced, right? That has been reduced to 11%. But here, an important change has been done, that is the granularity that we were talking about. Earlier, you had only one item group in this. Now, this has been expanded to 3 item groups, including metallic minerals, non-metallic minerals, rare earth elements, and so on, so as to track their progress more diligently. Manufacturing overall, 77.6%, including 405 items. Now 455 items have been included, comprising 76%. Electricity and gas supply, earlier you had 7.9%, consisting of only a singular unit, electricity and gas supply. Now that has been further subclassified into electricity from renewables and so on. So their proportion has increased from 7.9 to 10.8%. Water supply, sewage, and waste management earlier was not present. Now 2% weightage has been provided, and that is where these two areas are where there has been an increase. Okay, so this becomes important for your prelims examination as well as the mains examination. Now, then this is the chart or the graph associated with All India Index for Industrial Production. You will observe that there was a dip in the case of March 2026, but again, it has increased to 4.9% in April 2026. So the growth has been there. Year on year, as compared to April 2025, there has been a growth. Now, what are the key extracts, the key outcomes that we can derive from this month's IIP figure, that is April's IIP figure? Overall, the industrial output grew by 4.9%. Do we have to retain this number? Absolutely not. Please do not try to retain or remember this number of 4.9%. You have to understand or take a look at the trend, whether the trend has been growing or the trend has been reducing. That is what you focus upon. Then, this is where you have to put your focus. That is how there has been a change in terms of the capital goods. Capital goods, the growth is always welcome. Why? Because when there is a growth in capital goods, that is asset creation, machineries, etc. Then you have the case of infrastructure, right? Long-lasting infrastructure which gets created, right? So that is which is productive for the economy in the long run. Always capital expenditure and capital expansion is a measure of growth. Consumer durables grew only by 4.3%, whereas the non-durables grew at 2.8%. And that tells you that there has been an impact of the rising fuel prices and the case of inflation, okay, energy cost and rising fuel, due to which the households are basically cutting the purchase of non-essentials in general. Okay. Now, then after that, coming on to the next article, is climate research being held back by local instrumentation? On the face of it, this article does not carry out much detail. Let me be very honest. What is this article about? This article is a follow-up to yesterday's article associated with the Mega Science Vision 2035. Now, what is this entire article about? If I have to tell you in 2 sentences, I can wrap the entire article in 2 sentences. What are those 2 sentences? Mega Science Vision 2035, the climate document has been released. That document tells us that in many of the areas associated with climate monitoring in terms of the climate observation, we are still reliant on the imported machinery. We don't manufacture our own machinery. That is it. Okay. So in order to be Atmanirbhar, we have to ensure that we basically have to develop our own machinery. That is what the article is about. But obviously, UPSC is not going to be restricted to this only. UPSC will ask you the detail of the Mega Science Vision 2035 document, which has not been presented here. So that is where I will give you the gist of that document so that you are able to utilize it for the exam. But having said that, here the document basically highlights the fact. This is relevant for your GS paper 3, by the way. Okay. Now, the document basically highlights that in many of the critical areas earlier, the government had banned the import of the foreign tech or the foreign instruments and machineries. But because the scientists claim that the local machineries are not present and not to the same level, that is why the government has diluted that clause and now the imports are allowed. Now, what has happened is, let's suppose you import a machinery from US. Let's suppose. Okay. Let's suppose you import a machinery from US. Now, that machinery is not made in India. So you will have people, the trainers who will come and train the local population and the local observers how to operate that machinery. So the local operators, will they ever know the operating parameters of the machinery? No. They will have only limited amount of idea. Will they be able to calibrate it properly? For any scientific instrument, the measurement is important. For any measurement, calibration is important. Will they be able to calibrate it properly? Absolutely no. So that means there will be faulty data that they would be relying upon for a very, very long period of time, isn't it? So that is why there is need for indigenization in terms of equipment manufacturing. But what is it that UPSC will be concerned with? Mega Science Vision 2035 Climate Research Report. Now, this is a report who has prepared it under the Office of Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. Okay? Under the Office of the PSA to the Government of India. That is where the report has been furnished. Okay? And what is the purpose? Long-term roadmap for strengthening India's climate science capabilities and resilience by 2035. What are the key outcomes? Strengthening observation networks with the help of the ocean buoys, with the help of the measuring and observing stations in the Himalayas, in various different areas. So, address data gaps across Himalayas, Indian Ocean, and other climate sensitive regions. For example, in many areas of Indian Ocean, we still rely upon the sensors which have been installed by the US government in order to gather data. Isn't it high time that we should have our own instruments which will transmit that data reliably to us? In the case of the Himalayan mountains, many of the regions we have not been able to measure the rate of the glacial melt, the rate of the glacial retreat. But having said that, slightest of the change in the glacial melt in the Himalayas can impact millions of population. How? When we talk about the rivers, rivers are the prime source. Himalayas are a climate regulator for the country. So we need to have more scientific instruments, weather stations, greenhouse gas monitoring systems, ocean buoys, glacier observatories, etc. For example, even when we talk about the radar systems, now there, as we have mentioned before multiple times as well, you need the key installation of the Doppler radar systems. Radars. Doppler radar, some places it has been installed, but they give you an idea about not only the regions which are going to receive rainfall, but how much rainfall is going to be received. So that idea also is provided by these Doppler radar systems. Now, the key output or the key outcomes of this report has been that advanced climate modeling, develop next generation India-specific Earth system models, right? Not the US-centered or France-centered systems, improve prediction of monsoons, heat waves, droughts, floods, and cyclones, and associate it with AI and the case of the machine learning tools into the forecasting system so that we are able to avert disaster with the availability of time. Space-based climate monitoring, right? Launch of dedicated weather detection and weather prediction satellites. So satellite for greenhouse gas measurement. You have, for example, methane sat. Methane sat, which has been launched by the Western countries, is to monitor the methane emissions. We should also have that. After all, we are amongst the largest emitters of greenhouse gases across the world, right? Cloud and aerosol studies, Himalayan monitoring, the change in the land use pattern and how it has impacted the climatic conditions across the country, water availability in the country. So that is what space-based climate monitoring will include. Climate and carbon research, greater work on carbon cycle, carbon sequestration, carbon capture, and how to achieve net zero pathway. Okay. Now focus on vulnerability and adaptation. So climate change is upon us. We have to carry out the vulnerability mapping as soon as possible to understand which are the areas which are very vulnerable to the impact of the climate change, and how to adapt to them, how to adapt to scarcity of water, how to adapt, let's suppose, to any conditions where there's prolonged heat wave or drought cycle, so that the farm income cannot be impacted. So improve understanding of climate impacts on agriculture, water resources, public health, the coastal zones. Because of the rising sea level, the coastal zones are also impacted, and the Himalayan ecosystem. These are some of the key areas highlighted in this report. And in order to achieve Atmanirbharta or self-sufficiency, domestic manufacturing of climate sensors, environmental monitoring equipment, calibration systems, and scientific instruments, so that we have accurate measurement. Okay? Now, the proposed projects that have been proposed as per the Mega Science report: observation network, remote sensing satellite, climate modeling infrastructure, carbon neutrality research, urban heat island and aerosol research, cryosphere and Himalayan studies, AI enabled forecasting system. Okay, all these have to be developed. Now, then coming on to the next article, US moots 12.5% tariff on India for failure to enforce forced labor regulation. Now, understand the background of it for a brief moment, and then you will appreciate the article, the context of the article. Now, Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, had ruled against Donald Trump, the administration, for imposition of tariffs on various different countries. Like Mr. Trump had imposed 50% tariff on India. On China, he was threatening a 200% tariff. So every day he would wake up, he would conjure up a number, and he would impose it on a country. The US Supreme Court termed it as illegal and asked the Trump administration to the extent of funding refunds as well. Now, that is where some of the fiscal space of the US administration was reduced. And it was in the works for some time now, for a few weeks now, that the economists were predicting that in order to fulfill that fiscal gap, US will try to come up with some or the other kind of a tariff here or there. So what US has done, US, through basically the USTR, the United States Trade Representatives, USTR, right, under Section 301, Section 301 of US Trade Act 1974. Under this, it has cited forced labor in various different countries as something which is unacceptable. China, India, Vietnam, Myanmar, Bangladesh, all of these countries where forced labor, they say, is a norm. Due to forced labor, they are basically manufacturing goods which are cheap, that is flooding the US market, and that is impacting the economy. So as responsible country that US is, we will impose tariffs. So that is why US is seeking to impose tariffs of 12.5%. That is the background of it. Now, they have provided a window of a time window where countries like India, etc., they can submit the appeals that how they are not following the regulation of forced labor and they are against forced labor. That is what the window has been provided for. Textile industry will be heavily hit because textile industry is oftentimes plagued with these allegations of forced labor. So for textile products and textile goods, some time window or some of the products have been allowed, but others have been restricted. So this is a very selective tariffing policy again. But this time, US has tried, the administration has tried to circumvent the regulations of the Supreme Court by involving the US Trade Act 1974, Section 300. Okay? Now, For you, for the examination, obviously this won't be asked. 12.5% or 13%, that won't be asked in UPSC. For you, what can be important for the examination is the international regulation dealing with the forced labor. Just for the prelims, and even if it comes in the mains examination, you should be able to reproduce these. So ILO Forced Labor Convention 1930, Convention number 29. So that is, it requires member states to suppress forced labor in all forms. One of the ILO's fundamental conventions. ILO, Abolition of Forced Labor Convention 1957. So prohibits forced labor as political coercion, punishment for political views, labor discipline, discrimination, and so on. ILO Protocol of 2014, strengthening the prevention measures and protects victims and provides remedies for compensation. Even it has been included under the provisions of the Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030. So calls for eradication of forced labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking. Now, out of all these, which of them have been ratified by India? So basically, ILO Convention number 29, 105, both of them have already been ratified by the country. Now, which is the article of Constitution present in Part 3 of Indian Constitution, which talks about prohibition of forced labor? Let us know in the comment section. And do you know of any domestic act or legislation banning forced labor? Let me know in the comment section. Now, then we come to certain articles relevant for the prelims. Union Cabinet approves 9,585 crore budgetary outlay in order to support the cleaner vehicles in the region of Delhi NCR. So, in the regions of Delhi NCR, that is the states of Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Haryana, in these particular regions, it will be implemented. Now, that will be a budgetary support. Those people having vehicles which are of older make, BS4 and earlier, now they will be incentivized in order to upgrade their vehicles to BS6, Bharat Stage 6 norms of emission, as well as the case of the electric vehicles. Now, how will it be done? What will be the process in this? There are multiple processes which will be done. First things first, states will waive registration fees, okay, registration duty, that will be waived off. Then 100% tax incentive, motor vehicle tax incentive, okay, for new vehicles and for older vehicles, for new vehicles and for older vehicles, 50% tax incentive. Other initiatives have also been launched which are quite interesting. What are those? There will be fuel coupons which will be provided by the oil marketing companies. Fuel vouchers, depending upon the vehicle category that they buy, and that will be worth up to rupees 5,000 per month, 4,800 per month. 5% interest subvention by the center also will be done to provide easy financing. So in this way, it will be implemented in these particular states, UP, Delhi, Haryana, Rajasthan, so that at least in Delhi NCR, the emission load is reduced. So these are the measures which will be taken. Which vehicles will be covered? BS6 and electric vehicles. Now, Russia delivers the 4th squadron of S-400 missile system. S-400 proved to be reliable and substantially superior in the air battle in Operation Sindoor, marking a world record in terms of air kill of more than 300 kilometers, where it shot down a Pakistani AWAC plane, early warning plane, which was more than 300 kilometers in the interior of Pakistan. So, there was a deal which was done with Russia for the provision of 5 squadrons. Now, this delivery was delayed because of the Russia-Ukraine war. India had got only 3 squadrons till now. The 4th squadron has arrived. Now for you, important to know about some of the basic parameters of the system. So here it is a surface to air defense system. It has got multiple missiles. Many of the candidates are not aware about the fact that S-400 is an entire system including the radar, detection, as well as the launchers. Now, there are a series of multiple missiles. For example, you have 9M96E having a range of almost 120 kilometers for the closer targets. Then you have the 48 series from 200 kilometers to 250 kilometers. And then you have 40N6E for a 400 kilometer target. So there are these multiple missiles. The surveillance range is 360-degree. Deployment time is 5 minutes. So that is what you have to be aware for prelims. Cabinet approves 10,000 crore ATF price stabilization fund. Now, this is also something which has been provided in the PIB. Now, what is this? So basically, with the onset of the Iran war, the ATF, that is the aviation turbine fuel, which is utilized by the aircraft out there, now that has been very, very costly. The price has surged by 2.5 times. Right? In the case of March, it was rupees 60 per liter. Now it is rupees 142 per liter. So the price has surged 2.5 times. So what the government has done, government has, along with the oil marketing companies, has arrived at a deal where the oil marketing companies are making a loss of rupees 30 per liter right now because they have not surged the price of ATF to the same extent. So they are underselling at a lower value to the airlines. Still, the airlines are incurring heavy losses. That is why in the month of June, domestic airlines, they have cut the number of the flights by more than 250, due to which the price of the seats per passenger has increased. So what they have done is, this price stabilization will allow the oil marketing companies to provide the fuel at reasonable rate to the airlines. Once the war gets over, once the aviation turbine fuel price rationalizes again, then these oil marketing companies will gain that money from the airline. So they will have to come for at least 2 to 3 years of deal between the OMCs and the airline companies, airline operators. Now, center mulls policy to boost E85 fuel uptake. What is E85? E85 is an ethanol petrol blend having 85% ethanol and 15% petrol, widely used in Brazil, US, and now even in India. Now, for this, you need a separate class or category of engines, what are known as the flex engines or flexible engines. They can operate in a wide range of E10, E5 to even E85. The purpose of this E85 is to ensure that our import costs reduce, our dependency on fossil fuels reduce. That is why E85 is beneficial. Also, it will increase the uptake of the crops from which ethanol can be manufactured. For example, we are the second largest manufacturers of sugarcane. Ethanol can be manufactured from the sugarcane byproducts, that is bagasse, molasses, etc. So that is where even the outtake for these byproducts of sugarcane will improve the farm income. Then even the corn, that is the maize, that crop also, the byproduct of it helps in the case of ethanol production. So that is where basically I take a separate article in PIB, and there PIB has discussed it that flex fuel vehicles offer India a practical solution to reduce crude oil imports. Now here, what we have to understand is that since 2014-15, India has saved close to around 1.84 lakh crores in foreign exchange because of the fossil fuel substitution and reduction in 909 lakh metric tons of CO2. So flex fuel or ethanol-based fuel also allows for reduction in CO2 emissions. That is what the PIB tells us. So here, earning to the farmers 1.8558 lakh crores. Even 1% adoption of annual petrol vehicle sales in India would generate a demand for 4 crore liters of ethanol. Okay. And that will save 195 crore in foreign exchange. Provide 160 crore to the farmers. So E85 flex fuel offers several benefits, right? Lower vehicle manufacturing cost, minimal infrastructure development, which is high in the case of the EVs, faster rollout, almost 10 to 15 times faster rollout as compared to electric vehicles, right? Electric vehicles are import dependent for batteries, flex vehicles and flex engines are not. Now, another particular article in the case of PIB, that is the first BRICS anti-corruption working group meeting was held virtually. Now, this is where you had the first BRICS anti-corruption working group meeting, which was held. Now, priority areas: international cooperation, asset recovery, and tackling of cross-border terrorism, corruption, and enhancing transparency and accountability in governance. So, where was it held? It was held virtually in New Delhi, with New Delhi having the presidency. Okay, so this also becomes relevant for the prelims. So 2 to 3 articles of PIB and the remaining for the Hindu. Revise this from the PDF. The PDF will be provided in the Telegram group shortly. That is sufficient for your current affairs of the day. Try writing the answers and take a look at the MCQs in the Telegram channel so that you are able to understand your overall level of assessment. So that will be all from my side. I hope you have understood the content, it has added value, and the questions that I have asked, put that in the comment section. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.